Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're looking at Frieren. As Frieren comes out next week, wanted to put a deck out there. Now this is an 8 pants build. This might be different from the 8 pants build. You see this has the trial deck top end, put the level 1 Fern into the level 3 Frieren. So if you're looking at the 8 pants build, the two 8 pants build top ends that you're potentially looking at are this trial deck top end, which is a non-play cantrip, to be able to add a card to hand, and then on attack, ditch 2 cards, as long as you have 2 or more other characters to burn 4, and then you give it character 2,000 power. So essentially it's a burn 4 on attack, funds up to one of the cards to make that happen, or a card you're missing along the way. So it's effectively like a ditch 1, burn 4. It does cost 2, but it's effectively because you refund 1. The other option is the Frieren from the booster pack on play heal. As long as there are 3 or more events with magic and name in waiting room, you can choose one of the 3 effects. First one being mill 12 of your opponent. Second one being look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck, put one of them back and put the rest in the waiting. So it's kind of like a Mocha 2, kind of. And the third ability is ditch 2 to burn 3. While that top end is a bit more selective in what it can potentially do, I have the big preference of, if I'm going to be paying the same cost anyway, and one allows me better reach to be able to get there, I'm going to go for that one. So I'm going to go for the trial deck one here in this case. I think burn 3 is a better number in regards to potentially damage sticking. However, I think that if you're having a bad game, the ability to cantrip on play may be more helpful, especially when trying to close a game. So I would argue between the two, the trial deck is a bit more reach, but a little bit higher ceiling. Whereas the booster pack is a bit more precise in its dealing of damage. So with that in mind, I went with the trial deck. Those were the considerations brought into that. Level 1 combo would be the same no matter what build you're playing for the 8 pants build. It's still going to be the Fern level 1. Allows you to get the events into hand, specifically, in this case, the Flight Magic. There are 2 different cards that you could potentially grab. This deck specifically only runs the Flight Magic, so in part just because I had a hard time justifying enough red to be able to make the other one happen. But those are the combos of the deck. Let's look at it from 0 on the way up. First off, we have this green level 0 that allows us to be able to, on play, pay 1, clock self to search for a level 1 or lower character add to hand. Classic kind of Ricky profile to search Ricky. It also has a secondary ability that you can pay 1, discard an event from your hand to choose an event from waiting room and add it back to hand. Now, I think that's a really interesting effect, the event swap. Especially since you have a combo that can get you events on command. Being able to turn those events into other events can be very useful very quickly, especially because we run a lot of events in this deck. We also run, then, this Frieren. It's an on-play Fuka. So when the card is placed on stage, you can look at the top 4 cards up to the top 4 cards of the deck, choose a level 1 or higher, and add it to hand when you discard a card. So on command mill, be able to turn cards into other cards, potentially grabbing events off of that as well. Some would say likely grabbing events off that, but either way. I run 2 copies of this Fern, in part because it's a potential double filter. On play, you reveal the top card of the deck. If it's an event or a character, you can add it to your hand and discard a card from hand. So potential hand filter that way. It also, on play, you mill 2 cards. That is kind of forced, required of this card. That's the downside of this card, is it's forced mill 2. But I think it's kind of worth it here, because if you mill an event, which we run a fair few events, if there's an event there, you can ditch a card to salvage a character from waiting room. So if you mill out a card that you actually wanted to bring back to hand, you can get it back pretty easily. And then we run this Brainstorm. This Brainstorm is kind of like one of the glue pieces that really make this deck function really well. This Brainstorm here is really what makes this event package really interesting. When you play an event, when this card's on stage, after you play the event, you can look at the top 2 cards of the deck and rearrange them. So put them in any order. I think that's really interesting, and being able to know what your triggers are going into whatever the next stage is going to be, or maybe potentially help set up a brainstorm, knowing you have climaxes on top of the deck, I think is really an interesting move here with this card. It also works defensively too. So you can play the counter event defensively and then top deck rearrange to get the climax that's on top of your deck into the right position, so you can potentially cancel a little deeper. So that way you can potentially get more cards out of your deck when you do that, so you're bettering your compression as you go. I think that's the least interesting. And so with that kind of defensive scrying ability, as well as offensive usage for it, makes this a really interesting card for this list. It's also attached to a Salvage Brainstorm. With your main events being torches, so you're basically milling through your deck anyway, having a Salvage Brainstorm attached with that, attached with more beneficial event package options, makes it a really interesting play. I run one of this Redfern, in part because it's really good anti-marker tech. When you play this card down, you can choose a space on the stage of your opponent, and you remove the markers from that space. So effectively, if you're playing against Overlord, you can still target the Ions that's hexproofed, because you're not technically targeting that Ions, you're targeting the space underneath the Ions, and removing markers that way. So a legitimate tech option into the current meta, since Overlord is predicted to be one of the top 3 going into the season, especially if we see a lot of Frieren. Having just a single card of this is very useful to deny markers as needed. And because you don't give enough pieces in here, you can recur it relatively quickly too. So I think you could affect multiple lanes with just one card. I also run this back row Frieren, essentially. This is our pants support, that whenever we trigger pants, we can ditch a pants to look at the top card of the deck, either put it on top or bottom, and then salvage a character. So effectively turning the pants into a salvage. So if we're triggering a lot of pants, we can just turn them into salvages. So I'll make sure that we're getting the right cards that we need in hand, especially because this deck is a bit more event heavy, and being with pants as well, you could potentially have a lot of cards in hand that you don't actually want or are not super effective for replacing board all that quickly. Being able to kind of turn climaxes into characters for free, I think, is actually a very big thing here. It also has the ability to rest itself to give a character 1,000 power. There are going to be situations where that's really useful. With this yellow Frieren, this is an ability to be able to stock cards from hand to make sure we have enough stock for our end game or whatever we're going to do with it. We also have the ability to pay a climax from hand to be able to salvage an event from waiting room. So pay 1, pitch a climax, salvage an event. Especially if there are times when you need a very specific event, I think that that's pretty worthwhile to have. I would partly also just run it for the additional stock, because I think it allows us to be able to open up some plays, be a little more greedy with our stock. Because our end game combo is not stock intensive, it only requires our 6 stock to be able to pull it off. We can use that stock for other things as well. We also run the CX swap, and then the CX swap also happens to be a level 0 bottom deck bomb, which is just conveniently good into a couple different things right now too. So like being able to just have a bottom deck bomb on a staple profile, exactly what you're looking for here too. But that rounds out our level 0 lineup. A lot of different tech options here, not really any huge oversizes in regards to like power lines, but a lot of different tech options that really just help advance the game state a little bit more. Our biggest base power is only 2k, but we have a back row piece that can potentially bump up another 1,000 to make it 3k. But you're definitely not going to be winning board with this Frieren level 0. You're very much trying to get to level 1, you're trying to move on to the next stage. And that's where, and with level 1 begins our level 1 combo, which we already a little talked about. With climax down, you're sitting at 8k without any additional help, which I think is pretty good for offensively. Defensively, you're sitting at 6k, which I think is still pretty reasonable. So zeros are not going to be able to step over that with ease. They're definitely going to have to play into the level 1 board for sure. But the fact that it can get the event that can also potentially mill you through your deck, I think is really helpful too. Also at level 1, we have this Frieren that allows us to, whenever we play an event, it gains abilities. So it gains an additional 1,000 power, so it becomes 6k. And when it attacks, I reveal the top card of the deck. If that card is level 1 or higher, it can grow right to stock. So a potential way to stock charge up. while we don't have a lot of stock expense on our top end, that allows us to be a little bit more stock heavy in our mid game. So it allows us just more opportunities to be able to get things ready to go. Our other level 1 character allows us to be able to, whenever we play an event up to 1 time per turn, gets additional 3k power until end of turn, so it goes from 4 to 7. So we can do that same thing defensively to actually go back up to 7k defensively, which is pretty nice. It's not crazy, but it's respectable. We also have this ability, when this card attacks, to give all of your characters, when you trigger a climax, you can pay 1. When you do, you can blind stock the top card of your deck and you may draw a card. And if you do draw a card, you ditch a card. So just kind of another way of just another filter tool to make sure we're trying to keep pants out of our stock. Using this card first allows us to be able to potentially clean stock. So if paired this with the back row support, when we trigger a pants, we can pay 1, blind stock 1, draw 1, ditch 1, ditch a pants, salvage a character, in addition to looking at the top card of the deck and putting it on top or bottom. So when we do that in the right order, between those 2 cards, if you do the back row first, where you can look at the top card of the deck, either keep on top or bottom, you know what your blind stock's going to be here in just a moment. So you can make sure the blind stock is clean. You know it's in your stock, so it's as if you didn't trigger the pants at all. You can pay out the pants you picked up off of the pants with the back row to get a character. Then you do this card's ability where you pay the 1 blind stock, the card you already know, and then you may draw a ditch as another way potentially drawing into more events. So, like, you have a lot of potential here with this. You have a lot of potential with these kind of cards in play to really have a really interesting, like, clean game just based off card interactions between them. So that's partly why I run this in this deck, is so that way I can have that kind of, like, really interesting kind of off lane to help keep your deck looking really nice, just that way, like, preparing you to be triggering pants more often. And then we have the level 1 event. This is the torch event. This is what card you get picked up off of the combo. This is kind of like the finishing deal of our level 1 game, is all of these kind of pieces really kind of working together interchangeably depending on what the situation is you find yourself in. Now, this is kind of like your mid-game sustain too. This, like, you're doing basically this combo until you get to level 3. So it's just a matter of like how often and what your ratios kind of look like. It's a bit more dependent on the game state, but you're basically kind of playing this little like engine until you get to your level 3 combo. Everything else between now and level 3 are just support tools to help you in that some kind of way. Because like when we hit level 2, that's basically all support. At level 2, we have the 2/1 anti-change bomb that also on attack can give another character crazy amount of power, 1500 times the number of events in waiting room. We run up to 8 events in this deck, so that's pretty nice. You can definitely make that a couple. You can definitely increase the number of events, but probably not by a super amount. I think 10's pretty reasonable here. Still, you can supercharge a character's power to be able to step over just about anything if you have all these events in play. If we actually had 10 events, that's 15,000 power to be given to a character that already has his own base power stat, right? It's stepping over whatever it's facing. But the anti-change bomb, I think, is also important here too, because there's not many things that are actually playing true bombs at this point. But you also have a way to be able to deal with your opponent's board of oversizes to potentially take out 2 different lanes of early plays with this card alone. So definitely an interesting card. I think it's worthwhile just for that single effect to be able to like supercharge a single lane and also clear out a potential another lane. So if you run into a pretty heavy early game package, you can eliminate pieces pretty quickly. Run the 2/0 event is essentially just level down. After you play this card, it goes to stock. So another way to stock charge, level down a person's character. Level down a player's character. I think like Shauna. Get rid of the anti-burn with level down. And you have access to that too. So you have access to hitting an opponent really precisely with this card, as well as being able to stock charge, help keep your stuff going too. I also run the money counter. You have to have 5 characters on stage to make this card go, but I think money counter is actually potentially worth it. Being able to threaten money counter is at least worth it, I think. Whether or not you actually play the card, I think, is going to be more dependent on the situation and which games you're playing it into. But forcing your opponent to at least play around money counter can definitely also change games for you too. Hitting our level 3s, I run 1 copy of the early play that requires 6 or more events in waiting room. So like running 8 events is a bit more difficult to pull off. But I only run it as a 1-of because I think there's certain situations where this is really nice. This also allows you, this is a stock healer that also gives Encore to either dishing climaxes or events from hand. So it's a unique enough like couple of different conditions all at once that I thought it was interesting to at least continue to test out and try out to see if that's something that would be worthwhile. It doesn't come up very often for this card, but at least having access to this card and a potential heal before 3, I think is really interesting too. I do run the 3-1 event. This is the stock shuffle, where essentially you're, instead of doing a true stock swap, it just swaps it into deck, and then you fill the stock back up based off of the cards in deck. So it's like more of a decompression-ish tool. It directly affects that current turn in the deck you're facing, but depending on like a couple different factors, there are better situations for where this card could be. And our last profile is level 3 combo, so that basically sums up the deck. That this is the Frieren deck that I'm putting out there. We'll have some gameplay for it a little bit later this week. Next week will be Clock Talk, followed by 5 cards, 5 minutes, likely of Frieren itself. So that where we get ready to talk about a couple events that have just happened, see if there are any trends happening in the beginning of the year as we head into the later fall. So with that kind of in mind, that's been it. That's the deck. Gonna continue to play around with this set, probably play around with the set a little bit more after Houston comes through. Until then, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube thing, and until next time, have a good one.